So thanks again for joining us. This is our Heat Pumps 101 for Rhode Island webinar. My name is Amanda Barker, and I am the Clean Energy Program Coordinator at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. Agenda for today, we're going to start off with introductions, and then we're going to get into some heat pump basics. What are heat pumps? Why are they beneficial? We'll get into some costs and Rhode Island specific incentives. We'll talk about some design considerations, and then we'll get into questions at the end. So in case you're not familiar with Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we are a very consumer-focused environmental nonprofit. We were founded in 1982, and our mission is to speed a just transition to a zero-carbon world. We have programs in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Our offices are in Boston and Providence. And we achieve our mission through both consumer-facing educational content, such as this webinar. We also have webinars on electric vehicles, solar, basically anything that you can do to decarbonize your home. We have an educational program about it. And then we also have an advocacy component where we have two policy advocates, one in Rhode Island and one in Massachusetts, that advocate for climate policies and trying to get the states on track to meet their climate goals. All right, so diving in now to some heat pump basics. As I said earlier, we are a very consumer-focused organization, and we are very focused on the big transition that is moving our heating systems away from fossil fuel combustion to cleaner electric heating systems. And we want to help consumers find trusted vendors and sound advice. We also want to push the whole heat pump industry to be better by educating consumers. And so that is why we have this heat pump program. And you can learn more about our work and heat pumps on our website at greenenergyconsumers.org/heat pumps. So what is a heat pump? It's actually the same technology as an air conditioner and a refrigerator. Refrigerant is the key operator in all of these systems, which is essentially a highly temperature sensitive fluid or gas, depending on which state it's in or what temperature it's at. And refrigerant can absorb heat out of temperatures as low as -50 degrees, and it can also generate heat as high as 120 degrees. So essentially, it's like a refrigerator or an air conditioner that runs in reverse. So it can take heat out of your house, or it can put heat into your house. So it can toggle back and forth between heating in the winter and cooling in the summer. And I have a picture of water pumps because they're actually very similar to water pumps in that water pumps do not create heat. Do not create water. They simply move water from one place to another. And that's exactly what a heat pump does. It's capturing the heat in the refrigerant, liquid, or gas from the outside air, and it then pumps that refrigerant to another place you're inside your home, releasing the heat into your home. And that is why heat pumps can achieve efficiencies greater than 100%. It's really just moving heat rather than generating heat like fossil fuel-based heating systems do. Now, you may have heard that heat pumps are not efficient down to very cold temperatures. This was true in the past, but is no longer true in the present. Heat pump technology has significantly improved over the years, and we now have cold climate heat pumps that can efficiently produce heat down to -17 degrees Fahrenheit. So they work very well in our cold climate up here in New England. Maine, for example, one of the coldest states in the nation, has a very high heat pump adoption rate. Heat pumps come in various different forms. There are ducted versus ductless. So ducted distribute heat through existing ductwork in your home, or ductless you can install without ducts, which is what's depicted in this image. Basically, it connects to a very thin refrigerant line that then connects to the outdoor unit, which we'll get more into the different units in a couple slides. You can have a whole home or a partial home heat pump, so you can choose to only convert part of your home to heat pumps, or you can convert your entire home. And then there are two key different types of heat pumps. There's an air source heat pump, which takes heat out of the air. That is what is being depicted in this image here. Or there are ground source heat pumps, which take heat from the ground. So these are the different variations for ductless systems. The indoor unit is essentially known as a head, and these are the units that you see inside your home. There are three main different types. There's a wall-hung unit, which is the most common type, over here on the far left. And this can easily be hung on exterior walls without any furniture blocking the way. The technician also can easily access it. The floor-mounted unit is this middle picture here. It looks a bit more like a floor radiator, at least in where it would sit. And these are becoming increasingly popular and are a great alternative to the wall-hung units, particularly for first floor heating. And for these, the refrigerant line can come in through the basement, so it can be easily placed in the middle of the home if that's what makes sense for your home. And then the last type over here on the right is a ceiling cassette, which is mounted on your ceiling, pretty self-explanatory. This is most often installed from an attic level, and the ceiling cassettes are actually a bit of a newer product. And a benefit of them is that they can do a better job of fitting in between joists in the ceiling. So again, these are three varying types. It really comes down to what makes the most sense for your home, and what is the most practical for your situation. Now, the outside unit is called a condenser, and outdoor condensers do need space for air source heat pumps. So this image on the left depicts what the outdoor condenser looks like for an air source heat pump. It has a large fan, and so they do need a free flow of air. Because snow and ice might block airflow in the wintertime, the condenser does need to sit up on a stand to try and keep it clear of snow in the wintertime. So you can see both of these condensers are lifted up. And the condenser does need to be close to the house for electricity and to run the refrigerant line outside the house to where the inside head is located. Smaller condensers are roughly a foot thick and 2 feet high, and about 3 feet wide. So over here on the left is a smaller condenser, and then on the right is a slightly larger condenser that's typically used for whole home heating. Now on the right is a geothermal heat pump. While a geothermal heat pump has no visible parts outdoors, the refrigerant lines are underground, and they do typically connect through the basement wall to an indoor unit and are then distributed throughout the house. You do need space outside in terms of underground. You do typically have to dig at least a minimum of 20 feet to be able to access that heat source from the ground. And then lastly, there also is a heat pump called an air-to-water heat pump. This is a newer heat pump technology where basically the heat pump is doing the same thing of collecting heat from the outside air, but it then heats water to heat your home. So it really depends on what your current system is to see whether or not that system makes sense for you. But I will note that is a newer technology, and there still are not that many experienced installers for air-to-water heat pumps. So why is green energy consumers so focused on educating people about heat pumps? Because shifting our heating from fossil fuels to green-powered electricity is essential to meeting our climate goals. And so this graph here is from a 2021 data set from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And here you can see a comparison of the greenhouse gas emissions from heat pumps and other sources of heating with our current electric grid. So you'll see that even with our current grid mix, which is not 100% clean right now, there are much fewer greenhouse gas emissions emitted from both air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps compared to oil, propane, natural gas, and especially electric baseboard heating, which even though it's electric heating, it's very inefficient heating. So even with our current grid mix, heat pumps do reduce emissions. And as the electricity becomes 100% clean, which in Rhode Island is actually required by law, we have a renewable energy standard that requires 100% of our electricity to come from clean sources by 2033. Heat pump emissions will go down to essentially zero. So that is why states and utility companies are incentivizing heat pump conversions, because this is really the only way to reduce emissions from heating entirely. All right, now to get into some costs and incentives. Before I dive into the incentives for heat pumps for heating and cooling your home, which we just talked about, heat pumps can also heat your water tank for showers, dishwashers, things like that. These are known as heat pump hot water heaters. And right now, you probably heat your water with a boiler or an electric resistance tank. If you do heat with an electric tank, Rhode Island Energy, the state utility, does offer a $600 rebate for replacing that tank with a heat pump water heater. If you are replacing a gas, oil, or propane tank, Clean Heat Rhode Island, which is the state incentive program, offers a $2,500 rebate to replace those systems with a heat pump hot water heater. Heat pump hot water heaters are 2 to 3 times more efficient than all other tank equipment, whether electric or fossil fuel. And they work by pulling heat out of the air surrounding the tank. Now, because of this, they do need a large enough space, typically something bigger than a small utility closet. They also do leave that space slightly cooler and drier as a result. So typically the basement is a good place for them. You know, drier is probably a good thing for the basement that can sometimes suffer from moisture and mold issues. But if you do need to heat in your basement, you want to think about, you know, sort of how to not rob Peter to pay Paul, and where the best location is for a heat pump water heater. They do also require an electric hookup, and they also require a drain for the water vapor that condenses as the heat is pulled out of the air. There is a really helpful heat pump water heater cost calculator that I've linked to here. It's from the Efficiency Maine website, and that can help you try and figure out your operating costs with a heat pump water heater. So I wanted to get the heat pump water heater incentives out of the way. And now everything going forward is going to be about the heat pump incentives for heating and cooling your home, those systems that heat and cool your home. So there are several different incentives out there, both at the state level and federal level, which some of which are expiring soon, which I'll certainly touch on. But as an overview, I wanted to run through the different incentives, all of which are stackable. So you can combine all of these incentives to get the biggest discount possible. So the first one is Rewiring America program, where you can get 20 to 30% off the cost of a heat pump. The second is Clean Heat Rhode Island, which is the state-run incentive program. The Office of Energy Resources runs that program, and that is 60% up to $11,500. The third is Rhode Island Energy's rebates. They do have a standard rebate of $200 to $400 per ton. And then if you're converting from electric resistance heat, there's a rebate of $1,250 per ton. Now, there's also the federal tax credit, which is 30% up to $2,000. And then there are also federally funded rebate programs, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few slides. So first, to dive into Rewiring America's Rhode Island Heat Pump Access Program. Rewiring America, in case you're not familiar, is a really great national nonprofit with a very similar mission to ours to help people electrify and reduce their emissions. And they have partnered with Carrier, which is a heat pump manufacturer, and GEM, a heat pump installer, to essentially offer bulk pricing discounts of 20 to 30% off the market rate project cost for a heat pump. So that's a pretty significant discount that they've negotiated for you through their program. There are some eligibility requirements. You do have to be a resident of Rhode Island. You also have to make between 60 and 150% of the state median income. And you do have to own or live in a 1 to 4 unit home to be eligible. So if you are a renter, you can still be eligible if your property is landlord occupied. This program does also offer low or no interest financing options. And that purple link there is live. So once I send these slides around, you can click on that link and it'll take you directly to the program to apply for the rebate, or sorry, to be able to get the discount. All right, next up is the Clean Heat Rhode Island program. So you may have seen that the Office of Energy Resources was supposed to join us tonight to talk about this program. Unfortunately, the program administrator had a family emergency and is unable to join us tonight. So I'm going to do my best to go over this program in as much detail as possible. And if you have any specific questions, I may have to connect you with her in an email afterwards. So Clean Heat Rhode Island does have a low to moderate income heat pump incentive program. Essentially, if you are getting a heat pump to heat your home, you can get 60% of the heat pump system and install costs off in a rebate. But the incentive is capped at $11,500. So you can get 60% up to $11,500, which is a pretty significant incentive. And so that's for air source heat pumps, air to water heat pumps, and ground source heat pumps. And then, as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about heat pump hot water heaters, they also do offer a $2,500 rebate for heat pump hot water heaters. There are some pretty specific eligibility requirements for this program. So for eligible participants, you must be in a single family or multifamily home with an individually metered and heated unit. You must also be on a residential electric rate, and this is available to all Rhode Island electric utility customers. So the majority of Rhode Island is on Rhode Island Energy, but if you are also on Clear River or Block Island Power, you could still access this program. In terms of income eligibility, the household income must be below 150% of the state median income. So it's the same as the Rewiring America discount program. And income is verified via proof of active participation in either SNAP, LIHEAP, or the Rhode Island Energy discount rate, or you can input, if you're not a part of any of those programs, you can input your income into something called iVerify. If you are low income, they will actually cover 100% of the cost of the system. So once you input that information, they'll tell you if you qualify for 100% coverage or that 60% up to $11,500. Now, a new requirement as of this program round is weatherization. So the home needs to be sufficiently weatherized in order to be eligible for this rebate. That essentially means that the home must be built on or after January 1st of 2000. It must have completed all weatherization recommendations, or it must have had a home energy assessment that shows less than $100,000 in recommended work. So essentially, a prerequisite to this program is getting a home energy assessment, which is completely free. Rhode Island Energy offers those assessments free of charge, and most of the upgrades that they recommend are also free. I believe they cover insulation up to $10,000, which typically insulation is not more than that. And so they'll give you free upgrades like insulation, air sealing, things like that to really make sure that your home has a tight building envelope and you're not just releasing heat out into the neighborhood to make sure that your heat pump can be right-sized and not have to work extra hard to heat your home. For the home energy assessment, it must be from 2014 or later. If you are, if you are a Rhode Island Energy customer, and if you are a Block Island or Clear River customer, it must be from 2020 or later. If your home energy assessment is older than that, you do need to go ahead and get a new energy assessment. In terms of fuel type requirements, you must be converting from either natural gas, propane, or oil, which I believe everyone on this call said they're one of those three things. If you're electric resistance, the incentive is through Rhode Island Energy. You must displace fossil fuel heating in zones served by the heat pump, but it can be a partial displacement. So you don't have to convert your entire home to a heat pump in order to be eligible for the program. You do, however, need to sign an attestation confirming that the heat pump is the primary heating source in the zones that it serves. So you can still have a fossil fuel backup system, but the heat pump needs to be the primary heating source in those zones that you are installing it in. There also are some equipment requirements. You must use an installer through the Clean Heat Rhode Island heat pump installer network. And the installation does have to take place after when the program was launched, which was July 21st of this year. So to go into a little more detail in terms of equipment requirements, if you are getting an air source heat pump, the system must meet Energy Star's 6.1 cold climate efficiency criteria and be listed on the Rhode Island NEEP list, the Rhode Island Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership list, all of which are linked on the Clean Heat Rhode Island website that I will link to in this presentation. For air-to-water heat pumps, they must be on the Clean Heat Rhode Island air-to-water qualified products list. And for ground source heat pumps, the equipment must be Energy Star certified and have a valid HRI number. This all gets pretty technical pretty fast, and so Clean Heat Rhode Island has a lot of detailed information on their website as to all of the different qualifications. In terms of heat pump water heaters, again, the incentive is $2,500, and the systems must be Energy Star certified as well. Now, in terms of how to apply for the Clean Heat Rhode Island rebate, I listed out the step-by-step process here. So step number one would be to go to cleanheatrhodeisland.com and take their eligibility survey. They have a short survey that first just goes through all the different eligibility requirements, asks you some questions to make sure that you are eligible. If it does say that you're eligible, step two is to then begin the eligibility verification process by starting an application. Step three would be quote collection. So once your eligibility is approved, you would contact a heat pump installer from their approved network list and schedule site visits and get some quotes. Step four is pre-approval. So either you or your installer would submit a Clean Heat Rhode Island incentive application, including the selected heat pump quote. They do really strongly recommend obtaining this pre-approval before installation begins to be 100% sure that you are eligible for the rebate. And then step five would be installation. So after receiving pre-approval, you would work with your installer to schedule and complete the installation. Part two of that, step number 6, is the incentive application. So when the installation is complete and you've received your final paid in full invoice, you then submit part 2 of your Clean Heat Rhode Island incentive application, which is basically the invoice, proof of payment, and photos. And then Step number 7 is quality assurance. This is random. Some applications are randomly selected for a quality assurance review. If you are selected, you will receive an email notification from Clean Heat Rhode Island with the details on how to go about that quality assurance review. And then step number 8 is you get your heat pump rebate. So once your application is fully reviewed and approved and you've done quality assurance, if you were selected for that, your incentive payment will then be issued to you within 7 business days. So now moving on to the Rhode Island energy rebates. So these are the rebates administered by the state utility. You do have to be a Rhode Island energy customer in order to get these rebates. But essentially, they do have standard rebates for ductless systems of $200 per ton, and then $400 per ton for ducted systems. You, however, don't need to work with a participating contractor to get these rebates, so it is less stringent than the Clean Heat Rhode Island program. Better, if you do want to get both incentives, you will need to comply with the Clean Heat Rhode Island installer network and other requirements. And then I don't believe anyone said they heat with electric resistance, but if you did, Rhode Island Energy does have an enhanced incentive for that of $1,250 per ton. For this one, you do need to work with a participating contractor. And if you are low income and on electric resistance heat, Rhode Island Energy will cover 100% of the cost of the system. So if you do want to learn more about Rhode Island Energy's rebates, you can click the purple link at the bottom once we send the slides out. I will note that for electric resistance only, Rhode Island Energy does have a home loan program, essentially. It's called the heat loan that you can use to help offset the upfront cost of a heat pump system. Now, there also is currently still a federal tax credit available. Unfortunately, they do expire at the end of this year. So in order to be eligible to receive the federal tax credit, you would need to have your heat pump system installed by December 31st of this year. For both heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, there is a post incentive of 30% of the cost of the system, up to $2,000. And then for electrical upgrades, there is a $600 tax credit. You can claim up to $3,200 total per year. So you can claim, a combination of different things, whether it's energy efficiency credits, the electrical wiring upgrade credit, or a heat pump or heat pump water heater credit. But you can't claim $2,000 for both a heat pump and $2,000 for a heat pump water heater in the same year, because that would equal $4,000 and be over that cap of $3,200 per year. Now, of course, again, this all expires at the end of the year, so would want to act fast to be able to even get one of those incentives. There also is a tax credit for geothermal. That is the 25D tax credit, where you can get 30% off, and there is no cap on that. So it's just 30% off the entire cost of the system. This also does expire at the end of the year. So you would need to have the system installed again by December 31st. Here we do have a link to more information on the tax credits if you want to learn more. And then we've also included a qualified equipment search link, as you do want to make sure that the equipment you are getting will qualify for the tax credit. Now, this is an example savings scenario that I want to walk you all through. Before I do that, I want to make very clear that this is just an estimate of a total heat pump project cost using both Rewiring America's pricing discount, Clean Heat Rhode Island, and Rhode Island Energy's rebates, and then the federal tax credit. Individual project costs will vary from household to household, but this specific scenario is based on a 2-ton, 2-head system, and it also assumes that the system the owner qualifies for all of the incentives, which again, there are some eligibility requirements as we talked about. But let's say you do qualify for all of the incentives. This is a great example of how much you can save. So again, heat pump size is a 2-ton, 2-head system. It's a ductless system. The market rate for that project would be $15,000. With Rewiring America's discounted pricing offer, that would go down to $12,000 immediately off the cost up front. And then with Clean Heat Rhode Island's heat pump incentive rebate, you would bring that down to $7,200. And then with Rhode Island Energy's ductless rebate of $200 per ton, that subtracts $400. And then with the federal tax credit, that would subtract $1,320, leaving the total projected project cost to be about $3,000. So it does, once you combine all of these programs, it does significantly bring down the cost of a heat pump from $15,000 to $3,000 in this scenario. Now, I also want to talk about some federally funded rebates for Rhode Island. The Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed a few years ago now under the Biden administration, allocated funds to 2 federally funded rebates. The first is the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate Program, and the second is the Home Efficiency Rebate Program. For the first program, here is the acronym. Rhode Island has actually partially launched this program. So the low-income pathway is up and running, which I will get more into in a little bit. But essentially what that means is that these are point-of-sale rebates, primarily for electrification measures, and they are limited to low and moderate income households. And Rhode Island was allocated a total of $31 million for this program. The second program, the HER program, Rhode Island has submitted its application to the Department of Energy and is still waiting to hear back. These programs were not directly affected or removed by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, that is the act that has unfortunately taken away a lot of the clean energy incentives. These programs were not impacted. However, the implementation of them has been delayed due to programmatic uncertainty as well as staffing cuts within the Department of Energy. So we don't really know the status or the future status of these programs. Right now, the Office of Energy Resources is still waiting to hear back. I will say that some states have heard back, and some states do have both programs up and running within this new administration. So there is hope that Rhode Island will get this program approved and be able to get it up and running. But again, nothing is certain in this current climate, unfortunately. So to go into a little bit more detail on the HERE program, which is the program that is at least half up and running in Rhode Island, the low-income rebate pathway is launched. It has been launched since September of 2024, and the moderate income pathway is hopefully still coming soon. Again, haven't really heard much from the Department of Energy on that front as of yet. So these programs are all point of sale rebates. So they come right off the price when you're purchasing the equipment. And so they basically offer a discount on electric load service centers, which often are needed when you're installing a heat pump, electric wiring of $2,500 discount, and then also things like heat pump stoves and clothes dryers. You can get $1,840 off for the low income rebate, and then the moderate income rebate is the one that still has yet to be launched, but you can see what the rebate would be if and when that program gets up and running. And just in case you're wondering, again, low and moderate income households can participate in the program once it's fully launched. The income thresholds are determined by area median income. And so this is a really helpful table that shows moderate income thresholds for a family of 4 in Rhode Island as of 2024. For more information on this, you can visit the Office of Energy Resources Home Energy Rebates page. All right, so that was all about the upfront costs of a heat pump. Now let's talk about the operating costs of heat pumps. When transitioning to heat pumps, your electric usage will increase, while your gas, oil, or propane usage will be reduced. To compare heating costs, there are 3 things that we want to look at: weather, the efficiency of the equipment, and fuel costs. To first look at weather, this is 10 years of heating season data from New England. The x-axis shows the temperature and the y-axis shows the hour of the heating season that you are at that temperature. So as you can see, we have roughly 2,000 hours at 60 degrees and roughly 2,500 hours at 32 degrees. So that means that the majority of the winter, you're in that 30 to 60 degree range, and then 20 to 30% of the winter, you're in colder temperatures. Now, at lower temps, heat pumps, while still efficient and productive, they are less efficient, but they can still be greater than 100% efficient down to negative 15 degrees. Fortunately for us, we spend the majority of our heating season at above freezing temperatures. Roughly 70 to 80% of our heating season is above 32 degrees. But if you don't get the right equipment with cold climate technology, it can struggle to produce heat at colder temperatures. So living in New England, you do want to be sure that you get a cold climate heat pump for that 20 to 30% of the wintertime where we are dealing with below freezing temps. So now let's look at the fuel costs. The gray shows us that same weather data that we were just looking at on that last graph. The black line represents oil costs, the blue line represents gas costs, and the green line represents air source heat pump costs. As you can see, for the majority of the winter, air source heat pumps are going to be the most cost-effective of the different fuel types. But as we get into the colder temperatures, gas can be more efficient. And in the really cold temperatures, oil is more efficient, and even propane can be as efficient as heat pumps. Each home is different, and each home's electricity and gas and propane and oil prices are going to be different. So I really want to stress that. And I want to be transparent about the cost assumptions that we've made here. Because as they say with cars, your mileage may differ, right? So in this chart, we are using average historical annual fuel costs in Rhode Island. So what you want to do is think about what you're paying for your fuel source and then adjust in your mind what your cost benefit might be. We've also made clear the efficiency we assume for the air source heat pump equipment, because again, that's one of the factors that can impact your operating costs. So the way that we measure efficiency of a heat pump is through coefficient of performance, or COP for short. The COP is essentially measured by, for each 1 kilowatt of electricity that you put into the heat pump, you're going to get X number of kilowatts of heat out of it. So it's a tremendously efficient system, which is why it's so cost effective at these higher temps. So here you can see that at the higher temps, you can get a COP of 4, which is really, really efficient. And then at the lower temps, down to negative 15 degrees, you can see that the COP goes down to 1. So again, just want to stress, think about what you pay for electricity, and if that makes sense for you, think about 10 years from now, what you think costs will be like, and how that might impact your decision here. I will also plug Rewiring America has a really helpful bill impact calculator that is linked here at the bottom that kind of tries to estimate your specific costs based on what your current heating fuel is when you would convert to a heat pump. All right. Lastly, we are going to get into some heat pump system design options. So I want you to think about your home. Does it have ductwork or is it ductless? If you have ductwork, you have a furnace, not a boiler. You've got ducts in the floor bringing you hot air. Hot air ductwork is relatively easy to reuse for a heat pump. So essentially, you'd have a heat pump condenser outside, and you'd have an air handler in your basement using that same ductwork to deliver the heat from the heat pump throughout your home. Now, you would need to make sure that the ductwork is in good condition and can handle cold air and hot water. You may also be able to use central air conditioning ductwork for a heat pump, but you would need to get a technician out to examine if that ductwork that is currently sized for cold air, if it's compatible with hot air, essentially. Now, if you can do this, if the technician comes out and it makes sense, it's a great option because you'd be replacing two pieces of equipment. You'd be replacing your central air conditioning and your furnace with one, a heat pump. Now, if your home lacks ductwork, essentially you don't have a furnace, you have a boiler, and you don't have central air conditioning, there isn't an easy drop-in heat pump replacement for your system. Heat pumps don't produce water that is hot enough to match the heat that is currently produced by your boilers. Now, if you have a very well-insulated home, it actually is possible to replace your boiler with a heat pump because you don't need those radiators or your baseboard to get as hot thanks to that tight building envelope that's required for the incentives. As I mentioned earlier, there are air-to-water options in development. There are some available, but again, there aren't a lot of heat pump installers that are informed on how to install those at this point. However, you could use a ductless or a mini ducted system, which is much more common, and there are definitely expert installers in the area on that front. So for these systems, a single head can serve a larger open area like a great room, and you can have single zones or multi-zones. A mini ducted unit can serve several small adjacent rooms, say maybe a bedroom and an office. And as a reminder, you always want to insulate first to be able to save on operating costs. Now let's talk about sizing your system. One thing that we want to warn you against if you take anything away from this presentation is oversizing your system. This has been a concern that has come up for people who have installed so far, and we want to make sure that you avoid it. So this is an example scenario. The heat load for this contemporary style home is 24,000 BTUs, or British thermal units, of heat per hour. In this illustration, we've put one 24K head in the living room / dining area. This would provide enough heat to keep the house from freezing, similar to a wood stove. However, there would be a noticeable difference between rooms. For instance, the two bedroom areas in the back would be much colder than the main living area. The bedrooms would also be slightly warmer in the winter. This may be fine for you. You could put ceiling fans, sorry. The bedrooms would also be slightly warmer in the summer, which may be fine for you. You could put ceiling fans in those bedrooms and be totally comfortable. So really the bigger concern is during the winter time. This could also be only a partial displacement of your fossil heat system. So you could have a heat pump in that main area and then move the thermostat to the hall or back bedroom and set it lower than the heat pump and still have your fossil fuel system to heat the two back bedrooms, for example. Now, this is the sizing we want to warn you about. Too many heads in a small space. Let's say a contractor comes in and says, oh, your heat load is 24K, but you need a head in every room. I'm going to put in 4 heads at 9,000 BTUs. Yes, this gives you max capacity of 26,000, but it's fine because they'll just run less. You've now got 33% more than what you need. The problem with this is that heat pump systems are designed to run continuously, not on and off. That makes them very inefficient if you're constantly cycling them on and off. So in this scenario, in the summer, you'd end up with cold and clammy air because the dehumidification cycle takes longer than the cooling cycle. So the air will not be dehumidified, but it will be cold. So just really want to warn you against oversizing. Too many heads in a small space will not only decrease your comfort level, but they'll also be more expensive because you're paying for more equipment than you need. You're paying for them to operate more than they need to, so your operating costs will be more expensive. And again, that comfort level just isn't going to be there. So avoid oversizing. Now, you might be wondering what a potential solution for small bedrooms that are adjacent to each other would be. And one solution is a mini ducted system where you put an air handler in the attic above or the basement below these rooms, and you put tiny 3 to 6 foot ductwork or refrigerant lines into each room. In this illustration, you've got 12K British thermal units that are split between the 2 back bedrooms. And so each bedroom is getting 6K British thermal units and are nice and comfortable. These 2 can be connected to 2 separate condensers or 1 condenser. And generally, a condenser works most efficiently when it has fewer heads on it. You can put up to 4 or so heads per condenser. And heads can be up to 150 feet per condenser. Then to heat the main living area, you would have a 12K British thermal unit, as shown in this picture. All right, so what are some next steps? Before contacting contractors, you really do want to make sure that your home has had an energy efficiency assessment. Again, this is required to qualify for the Clean Heat Rhode Island incentive. And it's also just good practice to make sure that your home is well insulated so that your heat pump doesn't have to work as hard. Again, this energy assessment will provide free insulation and air sealing, and it is good for 3 years, and it doesn't matter your income level, it is free for everyone. A next step after that is to research the various different incentive programs. Your home energy assessor will also provide you information about this. I know I threw a lot of information at you today, so thankfully, Rewiring America has come in clutch again and has a very helpful savings calculator where you can click that link on the slide and it'll let you put in your home address and your home information, and it'll plug out all of the incentives that you're eligible for, both at the federal and state level, including the utility rebates. As another next step, we highly recommend the no-cost virtual independent consultations that you can get through both the Rewiring America program and the Clean Heat Rhode Island program. I will note that while these programs are separate, they actually use the same program consultant, Abode Energy Management, to have these free independent consultations. So you can go through either program and you'll get the same expert guidance. They'll really be able to walk you through heat pump configurations, what might make the most sense for your home. And what's really helpful is that they have a quote comparison tool where you can get 3 quotes and they'll help give you side-by-side comparisons where you can get independent feedback from an expert where they can explain that, oh, maybe this equipment has higher efficiency, but that's why it's more expensive. But your operating costs are going to be lower, so you'll save in the long run. compared to this other contractor who, maybe the upfront cost looks less expensive, but your operating costs are actually going to be much higher. So they're really helpful. We really encourage you to access them. They also just have really clear explanations of what can often be very technical information. I will note that the Rewiring America program is their consultant is able to talk about both Rewiring America and Clean Heat Rhode Island, whereas the Clean Heat Rhode Island program, with it being a state program, they can't really directly partner with contractors, and so they are distinctly separate from the Rewiring America program. So their consultant can't really go into too much detail about the Rewiring America program. So that's just a tip. If you are interested in the Rewiring America program, I'd recommend getting the consultation through Rewiring America so that you can get information on both the Rewiring America discount and the Clean Heat Rhode Island discount, whereas Clean Heat Rhode Island will really only focus on the Clean Heat Rhode Island rebate. And just to end the presentation, I wanted to give you 3 questions to ask heat pump installers. The first is your company one of the improved installers for my state or utility heat pump rebate program? The second is, will you formally calculate my heat load before I sign a contract to purchase specific pieces of equipment? This is very important. Again, getting to that oversizing piece, you want to make sure that they're doing a formal calculation. It's called a manual J, where they're making sure that they're accurately calculating your heating and cooling load and proposing appropriately sized equipment according to that load. And then the third question is the equipment you're recommending eligible for the state or municipal rebate? So all very important questions that we recommend asking before moving forward with an installer. All right, and with that, we are going to close us out and go into some questions. So I do just want to remind you all, we are a largely donor-funded organization. So if you really enjoyed what you heard tonight and you want us to continue to provide information like this, and you feel so inclined, you're welcome to donate at greenenergyconsumers.org/give now. Currently, all of our donations are being matched through the end of the year. So now is a really great time to donate if you are interested in doing so. All right, and with that, I will open it up for questions. I've included my email address here, as well as the email address for Clean Heat Rhode Island's program administrator. If you do have any program-specific, Clean Heat Rhode Island program-specific questions, you can reach out to them, or I'd be happy to connect you as well. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if we have any questions. All right. So we have one question from an anonymous attendee that has asked, what can be done in an emergency situation if your boiler or furnace breaks? This is a very great question. This is why we encourage proactive planning. So let's say, your heat pump maybe has a couple more, your oil or your boiler or furnace maybe has a couple more years left in it, you think. It still makes sense to try and start the process now, meet with a consult, get a free consultation to really start to figure out what a heat pump would look like for your home. Because unfortunately, when it is an emergency replacement, typically contractors are going to go for a like-for-like replacement, right? So if you have a gas furnace, they're going to replace it with the same gas furnace. Heat pumps, as we talked about in this presentation, do require some planning and right sizing and things like that. So you do want to try and be proactive and have a plan in place for when your system ultimately does reach its end of life, you are able to convert to heat pumps and have that plan in place. Another question we're getting is, how are the cooling costs of heat pumps compared to traditional air conditioners? So this is a great question. I don't have exact numbers off the top of my head, but I will say that because heat pumps are so much more efficient than traditional ACs, the operating costs are typically less. All right, another question is, most of your information seems to involve replacing older systems. What about new construction? So right now, Rhode Island has a pretty efficient building code that at least requires electric readiness. So for any new construction in Rhode Island, it at least must have the capability to easily, and the wiring essentially, to easily be able to be converted to electric. But it is not necessarily required to be built electric at this point. I will say that that is the easiest way to install a heat pump, is to just build from the get-go electric rather than having to retrofit an older furnace or boiler. But that is not currently required in Rhode Island. It is happening. The cost of building a new building all electric versus on fossil fuels is pretty much at cost parity these days. So we are seeing builders start to go in that direction. And again, the code at least requires very efficient building, which and the electric wiring, which if a builder has to install the electric wiring for a heat pump, might as well just go all the way and install a heat pump. So we are seeing a lot of new construction being all electric, but not all new construction is all electric at this point. All right. You said the cost is about $15,000. Does that include installation? So again, that was just the specific example that we shared in the slides. It is going to vary by your situation. But yes, that example did include both the actual equipment cost and the installation cost for that heat pump scenario. All right, someone is asking, is a ductless or ducted system better? It really depends on your situation and what you're converting from. If you already have ducts in your home and they're adequate for a heat pump, it makes sense to just connect to those ducts. I will say that in terms of efficiency, sometimes ductless systems where you have that refrigerant line that's connecting the outside unit to the inside head, they can be a little bit more efficient than ducted systems, because sometimes with the ducted systems, you do have some heat loss as the heat is being transported through the ducts that can sometimes be quite long. But really they're quite comparable, and it really depends on what you currently have and if it makes sense to use your existing ductwork if you have them. All right, it looks like someone is asking, how can you tell if someone is doing a proper manual J assessment, especially if they won't show you the calculation? I would say definitely confirm with your heat pump consultant. So if you do the free consultation through either Rewiring America or Clean Heat Rhode Island, you should be able to have them confirm that the manual J was done correctly. I would hope that they would be willing to show you the calculation. If they're not, maybe that's not the right installer. Yeah, I'm not sure why they wouldn't want to share that information with you. All right. With that, I think that's all the questions I see for now, and we are 3 minutes over. So really appreciate you all sticking with me through this long hour and 3 minutes. I know it was a lot of information thrown at you. And again, as a reminder, we will be sending out the recording as well as the slides after this webinar. So hopefully you can take the time to digest everything. And again, all of the links are active, so you can easily click on all of the different programs from the slides. So thanks again for joining, and I hope you all have a great rest of your night.